Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos. Bienvenidos a todos. Buenos dias. It's such a great pleasure to be here on the 60th edition of the Toronto Global Forum. Joe spoke about how we started this breakfast 8 years ago. He probably doesn't know I was at the initial meetings of this conference. I wasn't elected, but I was there as vice chair of the European Union Chamber of Commerce at the time, and so we participated and got this conference done in the city of Toronto. So it's great to see it growing, having the relevance and doing this work of bringing people together, business together, networking, and having these conversations in our city. So welcome, everybody. Before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I am Deputy Mayor and Councillor, and in the City of Toronto, we also celebrate not only the land where we stand, but the many communities that come here over the years. And this month, we have the pleasure of celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and I also wanted to acknowledge that, and the many accomplishments of the Hispanic community here in Toronto. Toronto is home to a vibrant and diverse Hispanic community. This month offers the opportunity of residents to learn about the deep history and rich culture of Hispanic and Spanish diaspora. And there's been so many great events that the communities have put together and have shared with us their celebrations. So we've learned so much throughout this month and throughout the year that we have the pleasure of sharing with them. Thank you. Thank you for sharing it with us. The City of Toronto has been a key sponsor of the Toronto Global Forum since it began, and I am excited to be moderating this year's Latin panel discussion. In an increasingly urbanized world, cities are taking on a paradiplomatic role in advancing the economic and political goals of nations. Cities generate the majority of a country's GDP. We usually say that Toronto is the economic engine of Canada, and I'm sure that in all your countries you have big cities that are that same economic engine. With national governments, while national governments negotiate trade agreements, it is up to businesses to take advantage of those negotiations, and those businesses are located to a large degree in large cities. The City of Toronto's International Alliance program recognizes the importance of establishing itself on the world stage to advance economic, cultural, and governance interests. Its goal is to foster formal and informal relationships with international cities, sharing best practices and creating networks for the purpose of investment attraction and trade development. So today we are joined by 4 representatives of countries in which the City of Toronto has established city-to-city relationships. I had the pleasure of actually working and sponsoring the relationship with Rio de Janeiro in 2013. It was a motion that I also had the pleasure of putting forward because I couldn't believe we didn't have a relationship with any city in Brazil. So
well chosen.
Well chosen, right? So it is my pleasure to be joined here by an esteemed group of panelists. First, I introduce His Excellency Martín Vidal, Ambassador of Uruguay. Ambassador Martín Vidal is a career diplomat with 25 years of experience in the Uruguayan Foreign Service. He has been ambassador to Canada and representative of Uruguay to ICAO since September 2016. His Excellency Pedro Borio, Ambassador of Brazil. Ambassador Pedro Borio has over 40 years of diplomatic experience. He's served as ambassador from Brazil since 2020. He was just saying, I think, just a few days before the pandemic hit. So I'm sure you're glad to be here in a room full of people today.
Finally.
Finally, exactly. I think a few of us are saying that today. His Excellency Alberto Játiva Naranjo, Ambassador from Ecuador. With almost 40 years of diplomatic experience, Ambassador Carlos Alberto Játiva Naranjo has served as ambassador, permanent representative of Ecuador to the OAS since 2018. And finally, Mr. Arturo Hernández Basave, Chargé d'Affaires and Deputy Head of Mexico, of mission to Mexico. Mr. Hernández Basave is a Mexican career diplomat with over 40 years of experience who currently serves as Mexico's Deputy Head of Mission in Ottawa, in Canada. Thank you. This is your panel for today.
Thank you.
I will start with a few questions, but I hope that we have enough time to go to the audience eventually. But before we go to the questions, I think we all want to hear from you and ask you to give us a little bit of a snapshot about the economic conditions in your country, what's going on. I think everybody here would like to hear that. And so I will start with Ambassador Vidal.
Okay. Bueno, buenos días. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Allow me, Deputy Mayor, also to add to the recognitions the excellent work that our Consul Generals in Toronto make the whole year for this to happen. It's an honor to be here again. It's always very stimulating to participate in the Toronto Global Forum where so many good ideas are exchanged. I think there is nothing more pleasant and stimulating to begin a morning throwing you a bunch of macroeconomic indicators, so I will do that. So we recently have the IMF forecast for Uruguay. So the numbers for 2022 are really good, in my opinion, considering the current context scenario. A prediction of growth of the economy of 5.3%. And a prediction for 2023 of 3%, which is aligned with the trend that we are witnessing. A great part of this strong growth predicted for the country for this year is due to exports. So 2021 was the historic peak of exports, with a 43% increase compared to 2020. And you may think, oh, 2020 was the middle of pandemic, probably the base was very low, but this number is 26% higher than 2019. And this year, we are 30% above 2021. So exports are dealing this growth. China is slowing down. The imports has been our main trading partner for 10 years, and now Brazil is taking over that position again. That was until 2013. So this is very important, I think, for what we're going to discuss today about trade. On the inflation front, that has been a problem for all our economies. Uruguay is expecting to finish the year with 9% of inflation, which is 3% above the rate that the central bank would like to have. But the signal for 2023 that is going to slow down almost until 7%. So these are strong numbers to have a sustainable trajectory for the economy and to be well prepared for what can come next. On the fiscal front, which is very important to receive investment, we have dealt with the fiscal deficit was quite strong during the pandemic of almost 5%, and now it's 3% and going down to 2.6% for next year. Last year, at this event, a few days after this event, a partner of the TGF, DBRS Morningstar, was the only major rating agency that predicted that the credit rating of Uruguay should be moved from stable to positive. Nobody else said that, and I think we proved them right. So I hope to see Doug Turnbull today and say that to him. But above that, the perspectives are quite good. One of the main challenges for the sustainability of those fiscal numbers will be what happens with the social security reform that the government is about to introduce to Parliament at the end of this week. And this is something that many observers are paying attention. So this is something to take a look in the next year. And of course, all this only only is good and is valuable if this growth is inclusive and we don't leave anybody behind. So sustainable economy not only means a green economy, but also socially inclusive.
Great. Ambassador Borio, do you want to tell us a little bit about Brazil?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Bonjour à tous. Bom dia. It's very good to hear Portuguese also when you greeted us. It's a great pleasure to be here finally, not seeing you through video screens like we did for the last 2 years. It's a great pleasure to be also in the largest Brazilian city in Canada. We have about 60,000 or more Brazilians in Toronto. Toronto that chose very wisely who to partner with, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Greetings from Rio. I'm sure they are very proud of this partnership. I think you're absolutely right when you mentioned the importance of the cities. I used to work with the most famous urban planner and later governor, mayor, Jaime Lerner, who used to say the citizens live in the city. They don't live in the federation. They don't. And when they want to talk to someone, they talk to the mayor, they talk to the city council members. So the cities have this huge role to play in whatever we want to do with Canada and with the other partners. Martin made my life much easier because almost word by word, I could use what he said to describe what's going on in Brazil right now. And I'm gonna spare you going through the laundry list of numbers and all, which would be exceedingly boring. We can do that after the session. But just to say that, particularly at this time, I think Latin America realized early that it had to react wisely and quickly to the pandemic and to the combined crisis of the pandemic with the war now going on in Russia, Ukraine, and we did the right work. So we're very happy to say that we have inflation now almost 2% below the level of what you see in the United States. So I think that says a lot, but more than that, we have managed to keep things moving pretty well. So Canada and Brazil is a good example. We have record numbers in trade, investment, and new business in the last 2 years. And we are talking about pretty sizable numbers, as you know. In Toronto itself, you can witness that because, if I'm not wrong, 39 Brazilian companies are listed in the Toronto Exchange. Our trade is in the numbers are all in the billions of dollars, and recently we concluded the largest industrial sale ever of high-tech products, Brazilian products, when Toronto's Porter Aviation decided to buy 100 planes from Brazil worth $7 billion in one single operation. I think this is probably the best example of how things are possible, and especially when the fundamentals are solid. You might ask me, so what about the political picture? Well, it's a vibrant democracy. We're going to have on the 30th, the second round of voting. About 137 million people will go to the poll stations. But the important aspect that sometimes escapes foreign observers or someone who is not more attentive to the details of Brazil is that, first, the new Congress is already defined. I would dare say that the roadmap is sort of charted. It's a very clear roadmap of economic consistency, of continuation of privatization. There is a pipeline of about 200 projects up for major infrastructure or concessions. And I don't think that this could be in any way changed because the voters sent a very clear message when it recomposed the Congress a couple of weeks ago. It's a center-right Congress, but it's a sensible Congress that is very attentive to innovation, it's very attentive to sustainability, it's very attentive to the questions of modernity, if I can put it this way. It's always a challenge to try to compress a picture of Brazil in 5 minutes. I was thinking, and I can turn the question back to you, how would you compress Canada in 5 minutes? And one idea occurred to me recently, is that we can talk about both countries as countries of high complexity, meaning there are not that many countries that combine the sheer gigantic size with the variety of population and with the extraordinary range of economic, technological, educational, human aspects as we do. Others do also have the same kind of complexity and all, but in a different scale. So that puts us in a very peculiar club, and I think it gives us added responsibilities. I mean, we haven't failed in these responsibilities in the past. Brazil and Canada go back a long time. We have been in Canada now for 82 years. We opened the embassy right in the middle of World War II that we fought together in Italy. We had been together already in World War I in Europe, so I think that also says something. But the most important aspect, I think, is that if you look at any aspect of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution that is now in course, and then I had the chance to be part of living in San Francisco for 4 years, you find out young people in Canada involved in innovation, involved in thinking of the future, and I'm absolutely convinced that you find a similar young person somewhere in Brazil, like in South America in general, doing that. I also like to steal the words that a friend of ours from my years in Washington used when he was invited to events like this. He always started his speech by saying, very happy to be here representing the most peaceful region in the world. And if you stop to think about that, it's particularly today, I think that's very important, because we do come from the most peaceful region in the world. If you look at the last 50 years of history, the dynamics are positive. If you look at the superficial news or something, and by the way, I think news are very superficial when we are talking about South America or Latin America in general, you might have an impression of turbulence, but the turbulence reflects democratic vitality. If you see highly contested elections in Peru or something going on in Colombia, but do not lose sight of the fact that those are manifestations of a very powerful democratic process which is in place. Are there problems? Of course there are. You don't have to mention a couple of hotspots in our region that affect us and certainly determine part of our policy, but I don't think that should make anyone lose track of what's really at stake. Let me give you another example. It's very common to associate Brazil to some degree of criticism regarding the environment. Just to give you an idea, to provoke you to think originally about this, the protected areas of natural land, the natural protection areas in Brazil are larger than the entire European Union. So I think that gives you an idea what we are talking about, to make the discussion go to a more sophisticated level. And if you travel from the extreme west of Brazil, close to the border, close to Ecuador, close to Peru, to the extreme east of Brazil, you will be traveling the same distance as from Lisbon to Moscow, plus 400 kilometers. So I think that gives you, that puts the discussion in a better footing. And it stimulates us to think positively also. We were just talking about what happened with Toronto, particularly, and with Canada before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had 160,000 young people from Brazil coming to Canada to study every year. So this kind of flow is something that we have to nurture, we have to protect, we have to invest in, and there is a very clear, in my opinion, notion of future in all of this. So I'll be happy to sit down and talk numbers and finances with anyone who would be interested later on, but I'd rather leave you with these provocations.
Thank you. Yes, lots to think about. Ambassador Naranjo.
Játiva.
The first family name.
Naranjo is my second last name. I should have just put one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But in any event, thank you very much, Madam Vice Mayor. Greetings to all of you here, and a special word of thanks to the organizers of this 2022 Global Forum for having invited me to this most important event. I think I'm the new kid on the block, although not a kid anymore, but I presented my credentials last June here as ambassador, and I'm all the more pleased to be in this event because I've been instructed to prioritize our relations, our bilateral relations, both in trade and investment. Some figures, but I don't want to bore you with that, but at times Ecuador is confused with the countries in other regions, and so I do need to stress that we are on the equator, but within South America, within the Andean region. At 283,000 square kilometers, we're probably the smallest together with Uruguay in South America. In fact, they're the two smallest and the two biggest countries in the region, from what I've just been noticing. And it's considered to be a very compact, mega-diverse. It's considered to be the most compact, mega-diverse country in the world. And Quito, which has an agreement with Toronto since 2019, is considered, was first declared the first capital, the first city, patrimony of humankind by UNESCO. Now, a word of presentation on politics. The current president, Mr. Guillermo Lasso, has been in power for over a year and a half. And since his assumption to power, he's injected a fresh dynamism into the country. And that's probably also taken into account his background. He's been a CEO of one of the major banks in the country. Now, this pro-market orientation has helped develop and enhance all what is concerned about enhance and attract an investment, stimulating trade, and above all, providing employment for the well-being of our people. Now, fittingly, this is called the government of the encounter, but what is being sought out from inside and from outside is to obtain a government with more of Ecuador in the world and more of the world in Ecuador. And I think this summarizes somewhat his political philosophy. What does he want to do above all with the economy? So this has contributed to major changes in the economy. Martín was citing the IMF. We cite the IMF when they finally give good figures because generally they're not that kind with our countries. But in any event, we should be growing above the average in Latin America at 2.9% this year. As far as inflation is concerned, we are a dollarized economy, as you probably know. But as far as inflation is concerned, we're probably going to end this year with the lowest one in the world, one of the lowest in the world, at around 3.9%. But there's a need to enhance our presence abroad, and this is basically done through what this government believes in. Its philosophy is to promote trade agreements. We are actively pursuing the negotiation of 10 trade agreements, and of course, with the major economies and countries endowed with strong economies such as Canada. And this is the case here. We've been looking forward to negotiate one. We hope this would level the playing field with the rest of the countries in the region because, mind you, as I said, it's a dollarized country, and without an FTA agreement, our products become extremely expensive, all the more when the dollar is gaining so much value due to geopolitical and geoeconomic considerations. So this is something that we're looking forward into. I'm pleased to note that since the advent of this government, and with all the new political configurations that you're seeing in the region, Ecuador is being seen as a land of opportunities. In fact, I welcome the notion that many Canadian companies speak of Ecuador as a beacon, and this is something that we appreciate very much. And this, of course, is based on some common values that we share with Canada, above all, democracy, the rule of law, the respect for all, including minorities, and above all, indigenous populations. Ecuador is probably the second most indigenous population in the world, the country in the world. And mind you, our indigenous movement is probably by far the most politically activated one, active one, and they represent basically right now in Congress, they're the second political force. But going back to our relations with Canada, I just wanted to point out also that we've recently signed an agreement, an MOU with the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and that we see that there's fertile ground to strengthen our ties. Mining perhaps is it's a spearhead of Canadian investment in Ecuador. Mining, which represented practically nothing 6-7 years ago, is currently in the fourth major export, and maybe even get to be third. And most certainly, if things go the way they go with Canadian investment and Canadian companies going into Ecuador, it would even overcome oil in the next 8 to 9 years. Just a snapshot, our main export, of course, is oil, but our non-oil products have gained more than 23% over the past year. Those are basically shrimp. We're considered to be the biggest exporting shrimp country in the world. And of course, bananas, which we've been world known for many years. And after, we have something also that we want to introduce into the Canadian market, is flowers. If you see roses, and whenever you see beautiful roses, you're going to see they come from Ecuador. I hope it would be because we're very good entrepreneurs, but it's basically because we are geographically blessed since we're straight underneath the equator, and therefore that makes that rose more bigger, brighter, and stronger. In fact, one of our major competitors, not even from this region, but from Ethiopia. But Ethiopia is 2.5 hours by plane from the equator, and that makes a big difference as far as roses are concerned. And of course, another export item, which again we need to introduce into Canada, is cocoa. Cocoa, as you know, is the basis for chocolate, but the cocoa of the species of coal, or not species, the variety of coal, Arriba is probably considered to be one of the best in the world. So these are issues that we are looking forward to advance with Canada. As I said, exports have grown considerably. Our major macroeconomic indicators are doing well. And I cited the IMF a moment ago. I would even venture to cite rating companies who, again, are not too kind to our countries, but again, they themselves acknowledge that due to stable macroeconomic indicators and fiscal discipline and budgetary constraint augur well for the country, supported by oil prices, which have gone up, there's no question about it, and a renegotiation of foreign debt. And this leads the IMF to believe, and not only to believe, we do expect that, and I think we all agree on it, that we'll be ending this year with the conclusion of our first program with the IMF, which has been finally concluded after more than 30 years. Now, this last agreement was signed in 2020, but this is the first time we will be concluding an agreement that's been signed with the IMF. So therefore, there's a community of interest, there's a community of values that we look to share with Canada, and we think that this is the basis. We've been working together with your country as far as corruption is concerned. In fact, Ecuador, Canada, and the Netherlands constitute the core group for the summit process, the democracy summit process on fighting against corruption. And of course, in the environment, we have a very strong NGO inner workings in the country that promote environment. And together with Canada, in fact, we presided at the Stockholm Plus 50 Years Conference. We presided over the round table consecrated to the future of the environment in the world economy. So this community of interest, this sharing of democratic values, should lead us to enhancing those relations, enhancing at the national, federal, but also city level. I think we'll be able to talk about that later on. And certainly promoting and having a much more robust trade and investment sector. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Ambassador, let's hear
Thank
a
you.
little bit how things are doing in Mexico.
Thank you very much. And I thank the authorities of the Toronto Global Forum and the city of Toronto for this invitation and for hosting us here today. Toronto is a city which I have learned to, I would say, to love. And this is because my daughter came 2 years ago to the University of Toronto, where she's doing physics. And she's absolutely fine and happy here in this beautiful city. So we come quite often to Toronto. I'm happy to be here. Well, as Ambassador of Brazil, Pedro mentioned before, Brazil and Mexico, I say that, Mexico, we belong to this club with special responsibilities in the world scene. It's not that we were looking for that, but we were working to develop the country. And a few years ago, we became into the economies with over $1 trillion. In the case of Mexico, a 1.2 trillion, that's the GPD of Mexico. We are number 15, according to the International Monetary Fund's ranks in the world. And when you consider the PPP factor, we are number 11 in the world. And that makes us to have a special responsibility in the scenes. Of course, while we are trying to accomplish our responsibilities in the multilateral organizations, United Nations, the G20, APEC, Pacific Alliance, and other arrangements on economic and political spheres, we are working hard to develop our country, and most of all, to deliver to the people. What matters here is, and the main responsibility we have is to deliver to the people. And with this, we are very much today, with this diversification of trade and political relations, of course, because our position in the world, regional position in the world, very much linked to North America. So Mexico today is some few months is the first top trading partner of the US. Normally we are the second one. Canada is also there. For Canada, we are the third also trading partner. That is a more permanent basis. For a number of years, we've been the third trading partners. The US and Canada are, of course, among the most important investors in Mexico. So what we are working through our bilateral relation with Canada is that going beyond being good partners, because we are excellent partners, we are good friends, to move to a more strategic thinking in our bilateral relationship, also with the US, to make North America more productive and more competitive in the world. I think that a competitive and strong North America will be good for the hemisphere because we have many links within the North and the Central America and the South. Those are Mexico, first of all, belongs to Latin America. That's why we are here, but we are also linked economically and trading to North America. So we have to continue working with the whole hemisphere, the Latin American and the Caribbean countries, to make them stronger and to face the challenges of the world today in a better position. The divergence of crisis is almost permanently since we were born. I think that since the mid of the last century, the humanity lives with convergence of crisis, from nuclear weapons to recurring financial crisis, to economic crisis, inflation. So the times we are living today are very hard, are tough. Inflation, energy issues, war. It's not the first time we're facing that. And we've been coping to that before. And we hope that through solidarity, through more alliances, with a North America looking to the south, to the closest neighbors that we have, and Mexico is one of them. That's the way how we are going to cope better with the convergence of crisis we are facing today in the world. As Ambassador Borio also mentioned before, Latin America is one of the most peaceful regions in the world. And I said Latin America because, of course, the US and Canada have been involved in different wars. And the US, not far away, only in 2003, the Iraq war was very controversial and was also a factor of destabilization in the economic systems, whether it's the political one, the social one, or the economic one. So, but we have to avoid that and to embed this peaceful setting that Latin America has. We share many values. We share the democratic values. So we are there to work together. But what I mean, the whole hemisphere should be working together to cope with the current crisis. What Mexico is doing to cope also with the responsibility of Mexicans. Mexico went into a general election in 2018, which was the largest in our history, or I would say the whole history of Mexico. The greatest number of people who went to vote, and we voted for a change because the Mexican people, realized before COVID and before the current convergence of crisis that we needed to do more for the people. And then what we went in 2018 was to elect the candidate who was better suited to cope with that, to change the mindset from what we call the neoliberal policies that sometimes most of them are not working properly as we thought a few decades ago. And then we are correcting that. We were already talking in OECD, in other multilateral organizations on economic matters, how to fix globalization. Because we have seen that globalization has been good in certain aspects and not that good in other aspects. So Mexico elected President Andrés Manuel Lopes Obrador in 2018 with his promise that he will establish a new model of social and economic pattern for Mexico. And of course, Mexico contributing again to North America, to Latin America, and to the world. We are putting the people in the center of the development, and with a number of stimulus and a number of programs, we are looking how to better deliver to the people, how to improve the situations of Mexicans. Before coming to Canada, I was Delegate Deputy of Mexico to the OECD, and as we said in the OECD, we have to craft better policies for better lives. And that is exactly what is Mexico doing to date, and that is our invitation to our partners in the North and the South to work together, creating better policies for the people. People are also the companies, because companies are composed of people, and people working there, people working in the public sector, public from all sectors of society need better policies to cope with their everyday life. And we have seen that the energy and inflation are the main challenges we're facing today.
So I gave you ample of time to talk about, and you covered a lot. You covered a lot of the opportunities. I think that many people in this room, to be honest with you, know that there is in Latin America. And I find that many people, the ones that know, that understand that market and understand Latin America, always feel like it's like, why don't we have more? Why isn't Canada doing it more? So I'm going to be going off script, because from this conversation, what I would be interested to find out from you is, what do you think are the biggest challenges that prevent us from doing more? Is it perception? Is it knowledge? Is it what? Why isn't Canada and some of the Latin American countries doing more?
May I start?
Go ahead.
I think it's...
And we have 12 minutes, and I still have one more question about cities. Yeah, we can't go without talking about cities.
Very quickly, I think it's absolutely necessary to start by political guidance. So when you have a discussion in Canada right now about new Indo-Pacific policy or something like that, we are in Ottawa at least insisting, this group, I'm sure, and others, that don't overlook the immediate good partners that you have had for a long time. I think what all of us said here sends a very clear message. Don't lose track of what is immediately at hand, the enormity of the relationship with Latin America in general. And actually, if I dare say, be humble. Talk to us about Trans-Pacific and all, because we know it. We have been doing it for many years. I mean, Brazil has huge relations with Asia that go back decades. I mean, we have our biggest partner in trade now is China. We have had Japanese immigrants for more than 100 years. It's the largest Japanese population outside Japan in the planet is in Brazil, and so on. And other countries in our region I think this is a shared perception that Canada, yes, should look at regions where it's underrepresented, let's put it this way, but should not neglect the historic and deep ties with Latin America.
Ambassador.
Thank you very much. And I thank you very much for going off scripts, because this is the real conversation that we need to have. I think to answer that question, we can have another whole session or a whole seminar. It's a complex answer. But in my opinion, part of the answer comes to this perception issue about the geopolitics and the peacefulness that my colleagues from Brazil and Mexico talk. And I agree with them at some extent about the geopolitical peaceful situation of non-nuclear weapons in Latin America. By the way, it's the Tlatelolco Agreement signed in Mexico that defined Latin America as the first nuclear-free region of the world. Also because there are no conflicts between countries, armed conflicts, right? But peaceful societies also mean that there is peace inside our countries, that there is equality in our countries. And Latin America is not on top of the list on those issues. So there is a level of violence, of no peace, that is more subtle, that needs to be addressed. So going back to your question, maybe because we are not a geopolitical risk for North America, because we are not having conflict between each other, we are taken for granted. That could be an answer. But what is happening right now is there a massive migration from South America knocking the doors to North America. That we have a great potential to help the world to fight climate change and to provide global food security from South America, Central America also. So the opportunities and the challenges are both there, and there is no time to lose. I was very encouraged yesterday by the reference that the president of the EDC, Madame Lavery, made early in the morning about trade agreement with regional organizations. We are waiting. Mercosur is waiting. So I think we are finally aligning our perspectives, that what are the things that need to be done.
Anybody else would want to?
Let me just start off by saying that in the aftermath of COVID, and more recently of the situation in Europe following the Russian invasion to Ukraine, I think there's been a need to reconsider what globalization is all about. Now, as my Mexican colleague was saying, there are good and bad things about globalization, but I would submit that following these geopolitical and geoeconomic factors, globalization remains still unchallenged, or albeit in a different form, hopefully in a more humane one. And I think that globalization has to be translated into something that you could call regionalization. Regionalization within globalization. Now, there's been concepts that have been flowing over the last years, a couple of years, like the first of all talking about nearshoring, because countries have come to realize that you cannot depend so much on a certain region, and this is what happened with COVID. There was a point, I was posted in Washington at the time, when COVID started, you could not find a mask at Costco. When you went into Costco, it said no alcohol, no mask, no nothing. It was simply incredible because we all depended on the Far East. So even for security purposes, there's a need to have a more integrated Americas. Now, what does this imply? This implies what the concept comes out as nearshoring, but it's basically rebalancing and recreating those supply chains in order to foster more trade within our continent. Now, this is something that, at least in Latin America, we've proclaimed over the past 30 or 40 years, and it simply has not happened. But I think that we have come to realize, and not only in the South,
Are
but
we
also in
moving
the
in the
North.
other direction, Ambassador? Because, I mean, if we hear some of our partners, it looks like they're actually moving inwards. Some of the other partners.
Well, that's a purpose.
We hear something from the U.S. Sometimes it feels like they're even going more inwards.
Perhaps, but the thing is that what we've come to realize, I think, as a continent, is that we cannot depend solely on another region and be that a foreign region. What we need to do is to incorporate or to provide, foster intertrade among ourselves, to rebalance and redesign those supply chains, which will produce benefits for all countries. Martín was speaking about a certain issue that all of our countries have, which is immigration. Now, if you go looking into the last Summit of the Americas, there was a whole declaration about what migration should do. There are other factors involved there. There's the Venezuelan issue. By the way, Ecuador per capita is a country that has received the most Venezuelan migrants. We have more than 500,000. Other countries have more, but I'm speaking on a proportionate basis. We're 17.5 million people in Ecuador. But this is something that we need to provide, therefore, nearshoring. And of course, something where characterizes this continent is democracy. And therefore, to that nearshoring, you have to add what you call now frontshoring. So a community of values that leads and reinforces both democracy and trade. Both are stimulated and both reinforce each other. And this is something that I think we should really seriously look at, perhaps not going to the extremes, because it's not good to go to one extreme to the other. We went to one extreme in Asia and then we can't go back to another extreme, isolating ourselves. The purpose is to provide much more intra-regional understanding, and not only on trade, but on several other factors. Ambassador Brazil is related to the issue of education, which is essential. There's something which is, there's a certain cultural background which we share throughout the continent and which should be now more than ever, realized and used.
We have almost 4 minutes left. I just want to touch on this cities to cities. With all respect to the diplomats, I always say that, the biggest ambassadors that we have of every country is actually the communities that live in those cities. And we have great communities from all of your countries, which are great ambassadors as well. What can we do as cities with other cities in your countries to foster this trade, to foster this knowledge? In your opinion, what do we need to do about these alliances, these sister agreements? What do we need to do to make them even better?
Rejuvenate them. Because it's a great movement that has aged not so well. I think it lacks a certain degree of focus. I totally agree with you. The cities have a key role. That was very clear when the original Rio conference happened in '92. The cities tried to reorganize themselves in parallel. And I was executive secretary of a meeting that happened in Curitiba, my hometown, which was preparatory to the Rio conference. And there was this entire agreement that nothing would happen if the cities didn't take the lead. So I think that would be a very good basis to work with. The environmental question is going to become more urgent, obviously. I think it's becoming very clear that it's not something waiting to happen, it's happening right now. And the cities have a key role, I have no doubt about that. But the sister cities or the cities exchanges movement has aged with a certain lack of focus. And the same happened to the state-to-state or province-to-province movement that I think it would not be very difficult to re-energize, and as you said, using the communities as a base.
Go ahead.
Very briefly, two things. Well, first of all, we have an agreement with Toronto. That agreement is into force, and I think it's renovated automatically every 5 years. But as my colleague was saying, you need to rejuvenate them. But there's something perhaps what you were posing, which is very important. Democracy is strongest at the municipal level. That's where you have a contact with the people.
I'm a little biased, but I agree.
No, this is something which I personally am convinced of. At the state level, democracy tends to be harder to reach, whereas here at the municipal level, this is where democracy is fostered. And I think that's what our communities, and by the way, Ecuador has 25,000 Ecuadorians here in Canada, and basically the half are located here in Toronto. So I think that the way is to get our communities much more involved into, of course, city affairs, but also national affairs, to alert their municipal, provincial, and federal government on the need to foster more relations between our countries and Canada. And I don't want to take more of your time, but just basically, we are proposing to you, in fact, a roadmap for exchanging information, experiences, and also seeking technical cooperation in 3 fields above all. It's urban management, it's the subway system, the culture of subway systems, and also, of course, all what has to do with waste management. Now, of course, as I was saying, we have an agreement. Quito was the first capital, the first city to be declared a Patrimonio of Humankind in 1978, and I will be submitted next week, by the latest next week, a roadmap on these 3 specific issues.
Rejuvenate them and put some budget into it. I think it's very good. It's a signal of friendship, solidarity, but without focus, it will be very difficult. Most cities have elected governors. That's the case of Mexico City. That's the case in many parts of the world. So when government changes, then it's difficult to follow up. And I think we have to create a culture of working among cities. Actually, our Minister for Foreign Affairs, at the beginning, 3 years ago, before COVID, he launched an initiative to create a federation of North American mayors and cities. And to be honest, it didn't work well because many, many cities were difficult to reach. We tried to reach into many cities in Canada. We had a target of, every time the target was lower and lower and lower, because simply even to be able to contact the office of the mayors of small cities was very difficult. Either the cities are caught with work or they don't have the orientation towards foreign policies. In Mexico, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have a whole division working on that. So we have guidelines for municipalities, for cities, how to do it, how to improve it, but budget and focus, I think, is crucial.
We are out of time. You're good. We're out of time. There's a lot more things that came out through this conversation that we should be talking about. Hopefully people throughout the forum will have the opportunity to connect and to talk more about this. But one thing is very clear. I'm a firm believer of this for many, many years. That's why I've done some of the work that I've done, is that there's a great collaboration to be had between Canada and Latin America. I think the challenges, and I think, Ambassador, you touch it so well, could be turned into great opportunities so very easily for both sides, and I think there's a lot of work with very positive outcomes that could be had. So hopefully this conversation will continue, and we'll be part of it in some way or another, right? So thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Your Excellencies, for a fascinating discussion. Of course, we have challenges. We always do and always will. But the discussion about opportunities was what struck me the most. And the opportunities that exist between Canada and Latin America are huge. And I really, really appreciate you folks coming here today. I want to have you stay for a second. I have my boss, the Chief Executive Officer of the International Economic Forum of the Americas, Nicolas Rémillard, who is going to make a very important announcement, something that I think those in this room and those online are going to be very interested to hear about. Nicolas, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, head of mission, Anna, thank you for everything. Thank you for this great moderation. It's you're a true friend of the IEFA, but of the TGF. We built this together, I would say, a year before the event when we met several times. So thank you for your support. And I truly hope that in your new life, you're not going to forget about us and that you still will be around, be able to help us. Thank you. So it's a great day today. It's a great news that we have to share with you after many years of thoughts and I'm going to say hard labor, but we've decided to host our first edition ever of the IEFA in Latin America in Buenos Aires next November. So the theme of the event will be Cooperation for a Sustainable World with our presenting partner Integra Capital. So in that perspective, we will be making a draw at the end of this event for 2 Copa Airline tickets to fly to any destination in Latin America where Copa is flying to. But there's one rule. You have to be physically at the event to get tickets if your name is in the draw. First rule. Second, which is a bonus, if you do decide to attend the event in November, we'll cover the hotel. So I truly hope that you will take the opportunity to stay with us, at least be with us tomorrow for the draw. And I will have the pleasure of seeing you in person in Buenos Aires next November, November 14, 15. And truly was my first experience in Buenos Aires a month ago, and I loved it. It was phenomenal, fantastic. I saw Uruguay for the first time across the river, but that's great. So listen, thank you very much. For us, it's a milestone, and I truly hope I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Fantastic.